My friend Carl and I always liked to shovel sidewalks after heavy snowfalls to make some extra cash. Around 2014 or 2015, there was a blizzard raging through our town. It was dark, windy, and the snow was coming up fast. Our school had already announced that it would be closed the next day due to snow. So, since there was nothing else to do that evening and it was only about 8 p.m., we went out with shovels and started knocking on doors offering to shovel sidewalks for money. We made about $15 on our first house. We went through the neighborhood. A lot of people weren't interested, and most just didn't answer their doors. We eventually shoveled a second house and made a little more money on that. Then I remember there was a big gap between that house and the next house that said yes. It was a small corner house, but usually corner houses made more money. We rang the bell and the door opened slightly, but whoever was on the other side did not show their face. However, they were talking on the other side. A deep male voice asked, "Who's there?" I offered our snow removal service to the man on the other side, asking for $40 in return since it was a corner house. There was a short silence, then the voice on the other side said, "Oh, yes, yes, please." There was a hint of nervousness in the voice. I said, "Okay," and then the door closed. I didn't see the man's face at all. I turned to Carl and said it was weird. But we started shoveling. I started on the porch, down the path to the driveway. Carl was working on the sidewalks. I couldn't help but glance at the house every now and then, and at one point, when I turned to the window while throwing snow from the shovel onto the ground, I saw who I assumed was the homeowner. He was standing by one of the windows, watching me. I couldn't see anything in his face. He was standing in a dark room. I felt a little uneasy, but I tried to ignore it and kept digging. Of course, I glanced back every now and then, and he was still there. Eventually, I finished the driveway. Around the same time, Carl finished the sidewalks, so we started walking back up the path to the porch, but before we got to the porch, the door opened, and the man inside shouted, "Go around the back." Carl and I froze, looked at each other, then obeyed his command. We walked across the snow-covered grass to the backyard gate. I opened it and pushed through the rising snow, which was a little difficult. And there we were, in this man's backyard, where there was a small lean-to that we hid under from the falling snow. We waited at the back door, expecting him to eventually come out with our money. We waited for over a minute and were getting nervous. I started knocking on the back door, as there didn't seem to be a doorbell. Then there was the sound of a window opening, followed by the man's voice again, saying, "Come in." Carl and I looked at each other again, and then I walked in through the back door first. All the lights in this house were off. It was actually so hard to see anything. "Hello?" I said. I heard a man's voice from the other room. "I'm counting your money on the table." He seemed to be in the kitchen, which was connected by a small door to the room we had entered from. We walked closer to the kitchen, which seemed to be lit through the window only by the street lamps standing on the side of the house. I was standing by the door, intending to look through the crack in the door to see where the guy was standing in the kitchen, but I couldn't see through the crack because it was blocked. The man was standing on the other side of the door, looking through the crack. I turned around and pretended not to see him. I wanted to get out of the house as quickly as possible, and thought of a way to tell Carl that we had forgotten something outside. We left the house, and the man didn't say a word. As soon as we were outside, we grabbed our shovels and ran out of there. All our hard work clearing that house had been for nothing. We went back to my backyard, put the shovels away, and went inside to warm up and rest for a bit. Carl and I were a little cold, and then it was time for him to go. He went out the back door to get a shovel, but came back worried, telling me to go and look at something. There was another fresh set of boot prints in the snow. You may ask, how did we know? That's because one set ran from the gate to the back door of a shed in the corner of our backyard. Carl hurried back and we told my mom. We live in a very poor, relatively unsafe neighborhood, so my mom quickly believed us and called 911. The police arrived relatively quickly, considering the terrible driving conditions, and they went to inspect the shed. Carl, my mom, and I watched through the back window as the police pulled a man out of the shed. He had a shirt on, as far as I could see through the window as we shoveled snow. It was undoubtedly the owner of that house. He later admitted to the police that he was going to try to break into the house after we all went to bed. The police also said that he was really drunk when he admitted it, which made me think, what the hell? What the hell was he going to do to us in that kitchen if we hadn't left his house? It's a little-known courtesy in the mountains during a snowstorm. If someone seeks shelter in your cabin, you let them in. No, I wasn't the one offering that courtesy to anyone else in this story. I was the one seeking shelter. It was supposed to be a long weekend of hunting, but what started out as a cold, sunny day quickly turned into tons of dark storm clouds, and I quickly found myself right in the middle of a blizzard. After a full, rather unsuccessful day of hare hunting, I was too far gone and disoriented to return to my cabin. I had to look elsewhere for shelter. I came across a log cabin nestled between a circle of trees. The lights were out, but I had to try the door anyway. I pounded on the door with my fist a few times. There was no answer. But I could hear footsteps on the other side approaching the door. I expected it to open, but it didn't. I called out that I was lost and needed shelter. The door opened slightly and I heard a voice, "Come in, leave your boots by the door." I waited a moment, expecting him to open the door fully and greet me formally, as any other man would, but that didn't happen, so I pushed the door open myself and stepped into the dark room. The room was lit by 2 candles, just enough for me to see the couch where the man would later direct me to sleep. As for the man, all I could see was his silhouette at the far end of the room. The dim light from the candles didn't reach that far. I dropped my bag and gun on the floor and lay down on the couch. I thanked the man for letting me spend the night there until the storm passed. He didn't answer. His behavior wasn't the strangest. Mountain people are strange. He wasn't in the mood to talk, so I just went to bed early. I closed my eyes, although the level of darkness with my eyes closed didn't matter much. I subconsciously waited for the man's footsteps to leave the room, but they didn't. I opened my eyes, and his silhouette was still standing in the corner of the room. I felt the need to speak. "Yeah, I think I'll just sleep now, thanks." No answer. I rolled over to resist the temptation to just open my eyes to check on him. It took a while, but without hearing him leave, curiosity was eating me up. I turned to look again, and this time, I swear to God, the man's silhouette was closer, at least a few feet away. I couldn't make out his face, but a faint glow barely touched the man's forehead, and what I saw was disgustingly pale skin. I quickly gathered my things and thanked him, but said I had to go. I didn't look at him again because I didn't think I wanted to know what he looked like. I put my boots on outside and hurried back into the snowstorm. I came across another hut further down the hill, this time with the lights on. I knocked on the door and an old man and his wife opened it. They greeted me immediately and were very hospitable. They poured me hot tea and invited me to sit on the sofa. I told them my story about the strange hut on the hill and they both looked at each other, puzzled. The woman confirmed twice that I was talking about this hut. Then she said, "Dear, the owner of this hut was killed 2 years ago. The hut has been empty ever since." Before my girlfriend Emmy and I officially started dating, we still hung out all the time. We both loved snowboarding, and her family has a small house in Vermont near Stowe Mountain Ski Resort. She invited me to go there for the weekend to go snowboarding together for the first time. It was about a 5-hour drive. When we got to her small house, we spent about half an hour on this really windy, secluded road where we drove past random driveways that led to houses that were blocked off by walls of trees. We were high in the mountains. It really felt like we were the only ones there. A lot of the driveways didn't even have tire tracks in the snow, meaning there weren't even people in many of the houses. Emmy told me that was because a lot of the houses up there were owned by people from out of state, just like her situation. I was driving around 30 when she yelled at me to slow down. Our turn was coming up, so I slammed on the brakes. And then this little gap in the trees that I would have missed otherwise appeared. We drove down this narrow path and in a 4-wheel drive that led to a little house covered in snow. It looked incredibly cozy. We parked and the first thing we did was turn on the heat in the little house. We unloaded our stuff inside, and since it was already getting dark that night, we just cooked some of the food we had for dinner and watched a movie, besides running water. Her family had jugs of water for important things like washing hands and plates and stuff. But there was no working toilet. So she told me we needed to use the restroom outside. Only that night I needed to go to the toilet. So I just went out on the front porch and peed in the snow. It also snowed that night. We fell asleep at some point during the second movie we were watching, and woke up pretty early because of the alarm on our phone. We started packing to go to the ski resort. After breakfast, I had to go to the bathroom. I ran out to the bathroom in my boots and my feet were starting to get cold. However, on my way to the bathroom, I saw tracks in the snow. They were pretty big, but I couldn't tell if they were boot tracks or animal tracks. I followed the tracks and they actually went around the house and then went into the woods. I called Emmy outside and she came to look and said it was probably a bear since they were all over the place. So I went, did my business, and we headed to the ski resort where we had a good 8 hours trip. After that, we stopped at a diner to eat and then went back to the house. By this point, it was completely dark outside and it was snowing again. We made a fire, turned the heat up high, and turned up the music. We started drinking, and eventually I had to go outside again and pee. I ran out into the snowstorm and ran to the bathroom. I slammed the door to keep the snow and cold air from blowing in my face. I could still hear the loud music coming from the house, but then I heard footsteps crunching in the snow. As I passed the bathroom, "Emmy," I called out. No answer. The footsteps just went away. I took my phone with me. So I just texted her, "Are you outside?" But the text didn't come right away because the cell reception was crap. A few minutes passed, and I was still in the bathroom. I was just about to finish when the loud music suddenly stopped, and there was complete silence except for the sound of snowflakes falling to the ground outside. As soon as I left the bathroom, I realized that it was dark in here now. The lights in the house were off. I thought maybe the power had gone out. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and noticed a couple of new tracks in the snow leading to the house. I followed the tracks to the front door where they seemed to stop and then continued around the house. I knocked on the door and called out to Emmy. Suddenly the door opened and a hand pulled me into the house. It was Emmy. She slammed the door shut and locked it. She whispered that there was a man trying to open the door, which she locked as soon as I went to the bathroom because she was afraid to be alone. When she saw that the person at the door was not me, she turned off the power and hid in a corner of the living room and watched in horror as the stranger walked past the living room window, slowly peering inside. I arrived at the door just a couple of minutes after this happened. Emmy told me about a secret crawl space in the floor where her father kept a couple of rifles and a shotgun. Navigating in the darkness, I found the handle and opened it. Now using my flashlight, I went down the small ladder and grabbed one of the guns from the wall. Then we waited on the couch in the dark, afraid to turn the light back on, putting ourselves in danger of whoever was out there. The nearest neighbors weren't far away. Emmy said it wasn't any of them, and there was a chance they weren't even in Vermont right now. Once again, the only sound was the snowflakes falling to the ground outside, until the sickening sound of footsteps in the snow outside returned. I took a loaded gun and went to the front door, opened it and fired 3 shots into the air. The sound of footsteps disappeared. I guess they ran away, and the sound of gunshots echoing in the air drowned out the sound of running footsteps. We left the next morning on the recommendation of her father, who said it was best not to be there at the moment. They really didn't have anything they were afraid of stealing, so we just got out of there the next day. At least we had a full day of snowboarding. That horrible night was an adventure to say the least.